Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Habitual Linecrosser. Now, it may seem a little strange that this is a part one. Part two will be dropping tomorrow, and I'll make sure they're linked to each other so that way you guys can all see what's going on. But I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure how many of you would sit here for a 30-minute video because Air Defense Artillery has a huge history, a very, very long history, and we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So some people say that you can trace back air defense's lineage all the way back to the American Civil War where they were shooting down balloons with giant cannons. Well, as long as anyone in history has ever shot down a bird with a slingshot, you can technically call it air defense. But America pioneered the stuff. We created the stuff. We spent more money, time, effort on projects and developments than anybody else in the world. So there's no wonder why we are the absolute best at it. So back during World War I, field artillery was broken into field artillery and coastal defense artillery. The coastal defense artillery were considered and revered as some of the better shooters in the field artillery because they had to fire in 3 dimensions, unlike their counterparts who really just had 2 dimensions. The ground, X, Y, I don't know how the whole thing works, whatever. Now, the coastal defense artillery had to deal with things going up and down. So at the end of World War I, when aircraft really started to become a thing, the United States was like, oh shit, we gotta find people to kill this stuff. And kill it they did. So in 1921, the first 4 battalions of anti-aircraft artillery were pulled from the coastal defense artillery and formed. But, HLC, anti-aircraft artillery isn't air defense artillery. How right you are, my smooth-brained friend. In 1968, at a commander's conference in Fort Bliss, Texas, they decided to finally allow anti-aircraft artillery to turn into air defense artillery and change their logo, which would be instead of having crossed cannons like field artillery does, they have crossed cannons and a fucking missile. They also decided that at that point in time that they got their name First to Fire, which is a reference to a speech given by General Wainwright to veterans of the 200th Coastal Defense Artillery after the fall of Bataan. And Bataan is where we shall start. Hey guys, I'm here to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura.
I am but a whisper in the wind, a fleeting thought, made of everything you fear.
You, said that one before.
Ever heard of a catchphrase?
Ever heard of Aura?
Well played, funny talking plain man.
Last year, researchers at Duke University conducted a 12-month study, and in that, they purchased service members and their families' information for as little as 12 cents a service member.
Loose lips sink planes.
They still haven't hooked you up to the internet, huh? The crazy thing is, they got this information legally.
What kind of info?
They got medical conditions, financial situation, family members, sexuality, religious preference. They even got their geolocation data.
So what does Aura do?
Aura is an all-in-one digital safety tool that submits opt-out requests on your behalf. See, these companies have to take your information down once you select to opt out, but they don't make it very easy. They also offer credit and identity monitoring, antivirus, VPN, password management, comprehensive parental controls, and more. But this isn't just for military and their families. Everyone's at risk.
So where can I find it?
You go to https://aura.com/Linecrosser to get a 14-day free trial and try Aura out. It's the product that I trust.
Okay, I read your script. You promised.
Okay, very well.
Back to the show.
The Battle of Bataan. Not many people actually know that. So, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and it was, quite frankly, a blunder on the American side. There was a lot of warnings, there was a lot of preparation that should have been made, but we learned from these mistakes. However, they don't often know that about 8 hours later, across the international date line in the Pacific, in the Philippines, the Empire of Japan was now attacking the Philippines. The motto, First to Fire, stated by Jonathan Wainwright, happened to be in reference to the fact that the first guns that went hot against the Empire of Japan in World War II were air defenders. The primary armament of these guys happened to be the American 3-inch gun, which I'm going to be totally frank is a enormous pile of shit. Granted, it did fire 25 rounds per minute of 3-inch shells. It just took an hour and 11 people to set it up. Its flight ceiling, its range ceiling was 10,000 feet up, so most enemy bombers would just fly above that and drop their bombs from a higher elevation. These guys managed to hold out from December 8th of 1941 until April 9th, when their official surrender was signed. However, for a following month all the way until May, it's gonna be May, there were soldiers that were attempting to, I don't know if any of them were successful, swim across the ocean between the Bataan Peninsula and the island of Corregidor, and then finally, in the month of May, Corregidor surrendered. That was the last holdout. Those men then participated in the Bataan Death March. If you're unfamiliar with that, it is arguably one of the worst things that have ever happened in humanity. Now, when it came to machine guns, the guys in Bataan, they really were only using the M1919, the most beautiful machine gun that has ever been designed and was used from the 1930s until today. It's still in use, is the M2 heavy barrel 50 caliber machine gun. Those were still becoming a bit of a new thing at that point in time, and the Army hadn't purchased a whole lot of them. We started cranking out M2s like nobody's business because those things mean work. For those of you who don't know what an M2 heavy barrel 50 caliber machine gun is, or for those of you who've lost a world war, that is 12.7 millimeters. It has a range of 15,000 feet and lateral range of 1.8 kilometers. So like all things American, we started to innovate immediately. So some guy somewhere said, hey, what if we take this half track and put a mount on the back and put two 50 cals on it? So the M13 multiple motor gun carriage was built, and it had a cyclic rate of fire of up to 1,000 rounds per minute from two M2 heavy barrel 50 caliber machine guns. Well, not to be outdone, in the US constantly arguing with themselves and trying to make things more dead or gooder, they created very shortly after, within a year or two, the M16 multiple gun motor carriage, which now boasted 4 M2 heavy barrel 50 caliber machine guns that had a cyclic rate of fire of 575 rounds per gun. I'll do the math for you. That's 2,300 rounds of 50 cal per minute. Now, was this weapon system very effective against enemy air? Absolutely it was, but it was also effective against people on the ground. And by 1943-44 time frame, it had already earned the name the Meat Chopper. Well, during the Battle of the Bulge, these things were very heavily used, and one person stated that it's very hard to flank an American position when they're holding you down from a half mile away with 50 cal and not even trying. And after the Battle of the Bulge, the M45 quad mount, hold on, I know someone's going to be like, I've already said M16. The quad mount is the thing that sits in the back of the motor gun carriage. The M16 is the actual truck itself, okay? Just stay with me here. But after the Battle of the Bulge, it earned the name, don't do this, YouTube. Don't take me out, okay? This is historically accurate, YouTube. Stay with me. It earned the name the Kraut Mower. Probably the biggest air defense battle that has ever happened throughout history is the Battle of Remagen at the Ludendorff Bridge. And so a little bit after the Battle of the Bulge, they were heading towards the Ludendorff Bridge, which was the last bridge across the Rhine into Germany. The Germans wanted to destroy it. The Americans wanted to seize it. You see the obvious conflict here. Well, the Germans rigged it with 500 pounds of explosives, and unfortunately, they didn't go red, red, green. They went red, green, red, and not all of them blew up. So they only damaged the bridge. The Americans immediately took the initiative here and pushed across the bridge. They seized the bridge, and then they had engineers down there trying to put things back together and get it functional so that this thing would actually work as a way across the Rhine. During this time, Adolf Hitler was pissed about this. He was very, very upset personally. And they sent over 300 aircraft at the Ludendorff Bridge trying to take it out. They also used sea mines, floating them down the Rhine trying to take it out. They used frogmen in the first preliminary underwater breathing apparatuses to try and take this thing out. They threw everything they had at it, including 11 V2 missiles. This is the first time in history that missiles were ever used in combat, and the only time they've ever been fired inside of Germany. Unfortunately, these preliminary V2s just weren't very accurate, so even though the Americans weren't able to shoot any of them down, they only got within about 500 meters of the bridge. The bridge ended up collapsing later on anyways, but by that time, 11 divisions had crossed it, so it was really kind of a moot point, and they had already set up other bridges. But I want to go back to the air defense battle of this. This was the largest amass of air defense forces during all of World War II. This bridge was so vitally important to America that they put over 672 to be exact, anti-aircraft units to cover that bridge. So let me go ahead and do the math. Let's say all 672 of those happen to be quad mount 50 cals. With that cyclic rate of fire of 2,300 rounds per minute, with those, do a little math, that's 1.5 million rounds into the air per minute. So the Germans, they lost about a third of all aircraft they threw at the Ludendorff Bridge. As they came in, they just kept getting wiped out, one after the other, after the other, after the other. After the war was over, the United States realized that V2 is a scary thing, and we need to start figuring out how to deal with missiles in the modern era because no one had messed with this before. So we went back to the drawing board. Now the V1 it had a lot of payload, but honestly, they were quite a bit of a joke. But towards the end of the war, the V1s that were being thrown across the English Channel at the Brits, they were having competitions to see how many of them they could take out without firing a single shot. This is a real story. This is a true thing, and I got fucking hats off to you Brits, because this is ballsy shit. So you have a cruise missile, the world's first cruise missile, V1, cruising across the English Channel, and instead of shooting at it, what they would do is they would pull up alongside it and tip it with their wing, flip it upside down, which would screw up the gyros, and it would crash. That's a real thing. I'm not making that up. That is some of the most gangster shit I've ever heard come out of the United Kingdom. It's important to note that during World War II, the Swedish Bofors was one of the most widely produced and used weapons. Yes, Sweden armed both sides. This was an Axis and an Ally weapon. It was capable of 120 rounds per minute out of a 40 millimeter either high explosive proximity fuse. It also had armor piercing. It was a really, really important weapon. We used it in all sorts of things, which we'll get into here shortly. It was used in the United States all the way up until 2016, when we finally decided that it was cheaper to just design a new weapon than it was to try and find parts for the Swedish Bofors. So we start pouring a ton of money into R&D. The first missile that comes out of it is the first ever radar-guided surface-to-air missile, and that is the American Nike Ajax. This was a serious learning curve for us, and unfortunately the Nike Ajax was so short-lived because we learned so much from it that it was quickly replaced by the Nike Hercules. Now the Nike Ajax was originally liquid state, and then it changed to solid state fuel because we realized if you drop a liquid state missile, it has a tendency of going kaboom. So then shortly after we went to solid state, and all the missiles in the Nike program and everything since has been solid state fuel. So the Nike Hercules was quite a bit larger. It was quite a bit longer. It could go quite a bit further, but instead of having a conventional explosive at the tip, it had between a 2 and a 20 kiloton nuclear warhead. Now, the logic behind that in America, and God bless the United States, was you don't have to be able to pick out one aircraft to shoot down. If they're sending a bunch of them at you, you just shoot one and all of them go smithereens. In the 1950s, we also decided to take the Swedish Bofors and slap them onto a tracked chassis of some kind. I don't even know which tank it came from. And we put 2 of them on there, and that became the M42 Duster, as people like to call it. The Americans called it the Duster because it kicked up a lot of dust. Obviously, twin Swedish Bofors cranking out 240 rounds per minute. That's a pretty good dust cloud. The VC, however, referred to the M42 as the Fire Dragon. More often than not, given the fact that this is around the time that jets really started to become a thing, it was really pointless. And I hate that. But to fire at a jet moving that quick, you'd have to fire behind you as it was coming at you to even get a chance at hitting it. So the M42 was used for point security, and also they would spotlight people. I'm not making that up. That is a real thing that I read during my research. They would have a guy who had like a birdhouse, like night vision, and he'd be looking and he'd be like, "Hey, Charlie's in the bush." And then the dude next to him would be like, "All right, I got this," and flip on that giant spotlight. And then the dude in the M42 would just be like, "Peekaboo, I'll delete you." Whoop, 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 whoop. And they're gone. And the jungle is gone and everything else is gone. I feel like that's a pretty good place to stop. We'll go ahead and stop with the Hercules and the M42 Duster. I'm going to tag part 2 whenever it comes. It's going to come out tomorrow, so don't freak out. So as always, do not give in to the 22 a day. Every single one of you are amazing, and I will see you guys right here next time. If you'd like to support the channel, please go to habituallinecrosser.com, get yourself some merch, do whatever you need to do in there. Thank you so much, and play me out.